Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're doing something a bit different and, honestly, absolutely fascinating. We've managed to unearth these incredibly raw live Q&A transcripts from the late 1970s and early 1980s. We're talking about unscripted, direct conversations featuring an Iranian filmmaker living in exile and a German filmmaker, both going toe-to-toe with some highly opinionated live audiences. We're going to step right into those heated rooms and see exactly how they balance the intense, crushing pressures of art, politics, and literal survival.
To make sense of these chaotic Q&As, we're going to follow this quick roadmap. First up, art in the audience, then we'll get into documents over political messages, explore a colonized culture, break down surviving the industry, and we'll wrap it all up with the filmmaker's vision. Section 1. Art and the audience. The immediate reaction. Okay, so picture this. You're sitting in a crowded, tense theater, and the audience is actively, almost aggressively confronting these filmmakers about their totally unconventional methods. At one point, an audience member actually stands up and just directly challenges the Iranian Exile filmmaker about the agonizingly slow pace of his diary-style films. They literally just ask, "Why is the film slow-moving?" It's a completely blunt question, but you can feel the genuine frustration from people who are used to traditional, fast-paced action.
Now you might be wondering how he'd handle that. Well, his response hits the nail on the head. He just tells them straight up, the language of cinema is not dialogue, it's image. He brilliantly defends his pacing by explaining that when you slow things down to a crawl, you aren't taking away the action. You're actually magnifying those tiny, absolutely crucial details of everyday life that we usually just rush right past.
So, both of these guys relied on a really specific stylistic toolbox to challenge their viewers. They used deliberate, extremely slow pacing and these raw diary structures that make a single week feel like 10. They threw out dialogue almost completely in favor of pure images. They shot in stark black and white, and they leaned heavily on parallel shots to purposely build this intense feeling of human alienation. They definitely weren't trying to make it an easy watch. They wanted to force the audience to think.
Moving right along to Section 2, documents over political messages, the macro level. We're going to zoom out a bit here to see how the Iranian filmmaker's status as an exile colored everything the audience saw. Before we get into the heavy politics, we have to talk about this guy's track record, because his credibility was massive. Starting his career back in 1968, over the course of 16 years leading up to this Q&A, he was incredibly prolific, producing 23 documentaries and 5 full-feature films. I mean, this wasn't some rookie trying to make a splash. He was a deeply experienced artist whose voice was hard-earned.
But of course, the crowd wasn't going to just stick to art critique. They brought some intensely charged political heat. They demanded to know, under what conditions would you go back to Iran? They were grilling him on whether he had ties to the CIA or if he'd returned to lead a workers' revolution against Khomeini, who the filmmaker actually called a madman. The entire room was basically demanding that he pick a side and take a definitive, revolutionary stance.
So how do you even navigate that kind of pressure? Well, he completely rejected their boxes. He dismissed the CIA rumors entirely and refused to be neatly categorized. He just told them, "I'm not conservative, I'm not opportunist, I'm anarchist." It was this fierce, uncompromising protection of his independence. And that really gets to the core of his philosophy. He absolutely hated the idea of making a so-called political film. To him, overt political messages are dangerous labels. Plus, he pointed out that those movies, like the hit film Z, they're usually forgotten in 10 years once the political weather changes. Instead, he was dedicating his life to creating a document of life. He just wanted to show how everyday people live and suffer, creating this timeless, permanent preservation of reality for the next generation. All right, Section 3, a colonized culture, the German perspective. Let's switch gears and see how a completely different environment shaped the German filmmaker's reality. During his Q&A with an American audience, the German filmmaker drops this incredibly heavy line. He says, "We are a colonized country." Now actually, scratch that, he wasn't being metaphorical or philosophical here. He meant it literally. He explained that if you just glance out of a window in Munich, you're looking at streets totally dominated by Coca-Cola signs, massive IBM buildings, and American products. It perfectly illustrates that complex European love-hate relationship with America, where the physical reality of their own cities genuinely felt culturally colonized by foreign money. And you have to remember, this cultural colonization was layered on top of a super tense domestic vibe. He described a German society that was overwhelmingly over-efficient. Recent responses to terrorism had led to these highly computerized borders and rigid passport systems. Because of all this surveillance and efficiency, citizens were just hiding their emotions on the street. That is exactly why he felt so driven to make what he called street films. He was desperately trying to loosen up this incredibly tense, heavily computerized society.
Which brings us to Section 4, Surviving the Industry, Money and Distribution. Because let's be real, lofty ideas about culture are great, but how do these indie films actually get the cash and screen time to survive? To put this into perspective, just think about the West German cinema market at that time. American films were swallowing up a staggering 75% of the market. Other foreign films took another 15%. That left a measly, microscopic 10% for domestic German films. Theaters were practically owned by American companies who forced local cinemas to buy massive blocks of American movies. So the local artists? They were left fighting tooth and nail over the scraps.
So what's an independent filmmaker going to do? They had to hustle, big time. It was this relentless three-step grassroots survival tactic. Step 1, secure a TV co-production deal. Step 2, the director, the writer, and their friends literally pool their own salaries. And Step 3, they just fund the whole thing independently. In fact, the Iranian filmmaker talked about how a German TV network tried to censor his interviews about Iranian politics, so he just bypassed their system entirely and funded his art himself, using this exact method.
But man, the German filmmaker had it rough in a different way. He was dealing with this non-unionized labyrinth of red tape. The official funding boards were a total nightmare. You know what they'd do? They'd secretly reject politically risky scripts, but they wouldn't ever admit it was about politics. They'd use these vague aesthetic excuses, which just trapped filmmakers in this endless, frustrating loop of non-answers and bureaucratic brawling.
Okay, finally, Section 5, the filmmaker's vision, leaving a mark. Let's pull all these threads, the aesthetics, the politics, the money, together. We've got to talk about this amazing term the German filmmaker used, the kaleidoscope film. Basically, it's a structural technique that uses multiple heroes and parallel actions, and it's intentionally designed to mirror the ongoing process of human alienation. Despite all those crazy distribution struggles we just talked about, he stuck to this really complex style because to him, it was the only honest way to reflect the fractured reality of his society.
And I absolutely love this next bit. When an audience member told the Iranian filmmaker that his raw documentaries ultimately felt hopeless and depressing, he hit them with some incredibly insightful, kind of humorous math. He said, 2 negatives make a positive. His whole point was that by showing a negative, harsh reality on screen, it actually sparks a positive reaction in the viewer. You show the suffering, and it makes people want to get up and change it.
So that leaves us with a pretty massive question to ponder. If our daily lives were recorded as a raw document of life today, what on earth would the next generation learn from our suffering and our survival? I really hope this explainer helps you see how a filmmaker's environment, their politics, and the brutal reality of the industry totally shape the art we consume. Thanks so much for hanging out with me today, and keep questioning the world around you.